Letting me talk here. I'm going to be giving kind of a big picture presentation here. This is about kind of the overall process that FEMA does. I'm a contractor for FEMA. So I just want to kind of lay out the process of what we do on a mitigation assessment team. Talk a little bit about what's happened historically. So this is a briefing we gave to the federal coordinating officer. That's kind of the head honcho at the field office in San Juan. We also gave a similar presentation to a lot of the governor's representatives. So this kind of just lays out what we did as far as a pre-mitigation assessment team. Think of it as a building performance team, what our schedule was like. But let's just get a little context of what is a mitigation assessment team, what do we do? Well, typically it's a forensic engineering study. We're focused on how buildings performed. And it's more in the context of how the buildings performed, what went right, what went wrong, and what can we do to inform the next code cycle, what can we do to improve permitting and floodplain management regulations and those things to make things better in the future. We've done many of these reports. We used to call them building performance team reports. Now they call them mitigation team reports. That was Hurricane George in Puerto Rico back in 1998. I was here after George's. Many things have changed after George's, and many things did not. So I want to focus a little bit about what happened in the George's, Matt, and what we're trying to do right now. All right. So what do mitigation teams do? What are they trying to do? There's two objectives for a mitigation team. They're trying to give you first some recovery advisories and briefs on things. They're usually about 5 to 10 pages of what we call common causes of damage, the usual suspects. Maybe it's improve the connections of your buildings so they'll perform better in wind. Maybe it's put in more flood damage resistant materials. Maybe it's increased your coastal erosion setbacks. So we put those documents out. We try to get those out within the first 1 to 2 months of the disaster. Then the larger piece is the mitigation assessment team, the final report. That's just a picture. Okay, the final report where that comes out usually 6 to 9 months later. FEMA is planning on releasing advisories and full reports in English and Espanol. Thank you. Right. And I will not be doing the translating. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what happened in Maria. So the code requirement for Puerto Rico currently is 145 miles an hour. You can see at right about where we were at, right where it made landfall, right about 140, 145 miles an hour. These are some of the estimated wind contours. What did we look at in the pre-mat? We were here with a team back in October. Luis Aponte was kind enough to show us around, particularly around Toa Baja. Thank you, Luis. He also kept us probably from getting killed driving on the roads. So let's just look back a little bit on, in Hurricane George's, what happened. These were some of the original mitigation team recommendations back from George's. So these are the recommendations, and kind of here's where we stand. So good news. What were some things that happened? We called for adoption of a building code. You've all adopted a building code. We wanted to educate homeowners on the risks of flooding. We worked to do some of that. We worked on improving procedures for the enclosures beneath elevated buildings and protecting them. We worked on guidance for wind loads, for rooftop equipment. And so the 2009 international codes that you've adopted, a lot of those things are addressed there. We talked about corrosion protection for fasteners. Anybody that lives close to the coast, you know corrosion does a lot of damage to those fasteners, so there are recommendations to that. We also called for some studies on the electrical grid. That's a little outside my wheelhouse. I'm more on buildings, not the electrical grid. There was also this blanket prohibit tile roofs, which that's kind of an ambitious goal. But if you have a tile roof, they're wonderful for rain, not so wonderful for wind a lot of times. But we can see that a lot of the recommendations from George's were implemented. I would offer kind of a overall global observation. What I've seen is, good news is code got adopted. Bad news is code enforcement, not so great. This is not something you're alone in, but it is something that we've observed. So some of our key initial observations, permitted homes did better than unpermitted, or what I think they were now calling informal homes. Informal construction. Concrete did better than wood. You don't need me up here to tell you this, but this is what we've observed initially. As far as critical facilities, police and fire stations tended to have shutters that perform very well in the wind event. Backup power generation still seems to be an issue, whether it's the switch that transfers the power from the generator to the building, or if it's a fuel supply issue, or if it's a maintenance issue. If you've got a generator, you know it's a maintenance issue, particularly for a larger facility. Building codes and mitigation. We also had some successes. After George's, there were a lot of structures that were built that were kind of more resilient. They did quite well. The requirement for all shutters in these critical facilities did well. And codes have been adopted, but again, enforcement limited. Power, telecom, I'm not going to try to go into that in detail. Suffice to say, there's inconsistent power supply issues. And you all know that as well as I do. All right. So, mitigation challenges. Island construction, the concrete construction that I've seen, that's excellent. The things I've seen issues with is sometimes it's the wood frame additions on top of the concrete that don't do so well. Also, again, the number of non-permitted structures or informal construction, it's definitely troublesome because it's very hard, and we know it's cyclical. We know if someone builds a wood frame construct, they're harder to insure, they're harder to get permitted, so they'll build unpermitted. And so it kind of creates this cycle that can be difficult to break. Lack of resources to do the inspections. The old saying in the US is you get what you inspect, not what you expect. I have no idea if that translated at all. But, coastal erosion issues, obviously here it's a huge issue. Other parts of the island as well is a big issue. Making sure we update the building codes, making sure we have consistent power supplies. Some things did really well, some elements. Anybody have a little solar hot water heater on the roof of their house? Is it still working? Yay, see, they did great. They did great. So we're going to take a few quick examples. We did visit Rincón, but we had to do the briefing before we visited Rincón, so you don't have any pictures of Rincón. I'm really sorry. I've got pictures on my laptop of Rincón if you want to see them. Also, one other thing is I would really love your help. Jeff Gangai, Jeff, stand up because I'm going to make you self-conscious. So Jeff is part of my team. If you have sites in the area, we are going to be going around Rincón today and in the area later today. So if you have sites that you can think of, particularly things that did well, the ideal thing we'd like to find is something that did well next to something that did really badly. And we can compare and contrast why that happened. So if you have such places, I know, Luis, you've got tons of pictures for me, but if anybody has anything else, please pepper Jeff with questions. And speak slowly. Thank you. So what did well? So some wood frame structures did perform well. This was in Canóvanas. A wood frame construction in a hilltop location. This actually was well strapped, well connected. That was kind of the exception. This was more what we saw in Yabucoa, unpermitted construction, a light wood frame structure, got pretty well decimated. And unfortunately, we saw this a lot after George too. This was an elevated home in Punta Santiago. It didn't flood when the neighborhood flooded. It had a lot of protection. There's some well-built hilltop homes in the background here in Punta Lima. These were some well-built homes in Canada. So again, you all know how to construct to handle the event. It's just the difficulty as, these are the three words I would use. Time fades memory. So we build well, we build strictly to the code, and then time goes on and we start to forget. Perfect example, in Florida, just before Irma hit, they were lightening the code restrictions that were put in after Hurricane Andrew. 25 years after Andrew, everybody's forgotten about it, but now I think Irma's another reminder to them why they need to keep those codes enforced. And remember, for those of you out here that are not engineers, the code is the minimum standard. It's the minimum legal standard so you don't get thrown in jail. Okay, when you're a builder and someone says, I build to the code, that's awesome, but you have to do that. Okay, building above the code is better. Okay, not trying to pick on builders either, okay? But that's the idea, is it's the minimum standard. And so when we work with these MAT reports, we're looking at observations, conclusions, and recommendations. So in the next code cycle, that minimum standard could potentially be raised. Here's an elevated building in Punta Santiago that did quite well. It was elevated on fills, water went around it. Neighbors weren't so lucky, but that one did well. Again, that can be an issue too. When you elevate, how you elevate can impact your neighbors as well. This was a condo unit in Louisa that did well. All right. How much time do I have? Anybody know? Am I at 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Good. All right. 5 minutes for 10 slides. We're good. All right. So, police and fire stations, this was pretty typical. It was a concrete buildings generally. Backup power worked in Fajardo, in Toa Baja, not so well. The shutters did great. They actually elevated the interior floor and protected a lot of their office equipment, but unfortunately, I don't know what was going on with their backup generator, but they did not have a good ventilation system for it. So essentially, the way they placed the generator, all the exhaust was going back into the building. That's never good, especially in a fire station. Not good. We all make mistakes. And then this was a school in Canamas that functioned as a shelter. I know the WIN team will be looking at this in more detail. This was a school in Louisa that was a shelter site. Hospitals, unfortunately, this was Arecibo. I went to the hospital there and everything seemed fine until we got on the roof, and the best way I could describe this, and I have no idea if this will translate, but it was a yard sale for HVAC equipment on the roof, okay? Every piece of equipment seemed to have been torn to pieces, and they had backup power working there. Similar in Bayamon. So, rooftop equipment is a problem all over the United States, and it's a problem here. A lot of times we don't think of rooftop equipment attachments in terms of codes and standards. Anybody have a satellite dish? In the US, that's called a West Virginia flower. But anyway, but satellite dish, anybody attaching their satellite dish with a cinder block? Show of hands. You do it. I've seen it. You can't hide from me. I know you do it. All right. Inconsistent power supplies were an issue too. These were some of the old power generators, but unfortunately they didn't have the right fuel or the right maintenance. You know, some of the wind farms and solar farms were damaged as well. All right. This was one of the solar farms we actually looked at. The difference in damage could have been as simple as some of these things were elevated a couple of inches higher to accommodate a lawnmower going underneath them. It created maybe an additional wind vortex on it. I wish you could study that more than I could. But we're right now as a team going out, and we're looking in a couple of particular areas, building codes. All right. These are some of the potential advisories we're looking at. Securing rooftop equipment, securing and protecting glazing systems, wind performance of rooftop solar, some of which did quite well, improving roof system performance, minimizing flood damage, that'll be me going out in the field for most of that, and protecting building utilities. We're going to be looking at the performance of residential structure. There's a few what we call secure housing programs. They were implemented after George's. We're going to be looking at those in a little more detail, see how they did compared to others. We have a WIN team looking at shelters, making sure they meet the standards for shelters. You want to make sure people are being sent to a safe place, right? We're also going to be looking at critical facility performance, and it's always with the goal of looking at what happened in George's, making sure what happened in George's doesn't repeat itself. We'll be looking at codes. We have a team that went out and looked at met with many of the municipalities on their codes and their standards enforcement. We'll talk about the flood program quite a bit and how they participate in that. Anybody have a flood insurance program, flood insurance policy with the NFIP? No, that was me. That's me. Anybody have a private insurance policy? Don't be afraid. Okay, good. That's what I thought. It's okay. But we're going to try to increase awareness of NFIP issues as well. We'll talk about coastal erosion. So right now, this is the bottom line. We've got 3 teams that are in the field. The codes and permitting team have done most of their work. I will be out with a team looking at the coastal issues, starting in Rincón and Mayagüez, and then moving over to Humacao later in the week. So I'll get lots of hotel points in the next few days. And then we'll have a wind team looking at wind issues and sheltering. And our goal is to get our field observations completed this week and then focus on these areas. Wind and flood damage to residential and critical facilities. We'll also look a little bit about some of the interior mountain flooding and the landslide issues and the soil issues associated with them. And again, it's all about what we observe and then trying to draw conclusions and recommendations to improve the next code cycle. That's kind of why we're here. We'll put out about 5 advisories and fact sheets, and we'll put out a 120-page approximate report. There'll be plenty of what I call appendix fodder at the end that'll be beyond that. And the goal is those will be fully translated into English and Spanish, again, not by me. We'll also be working on a couple of separate task orders that we're going to look at. One of which I'm hoping will work out is we'll do some training and outreach to the code folks, but one of the things we'd like to do is actually try to give you some basic residential home design plans. I don't know if some of the university folks have already done this, but the idea is maybe try to get some simple plans out for folks that they could use to build a resilient house that would hold together. And that would be great, and you could do the outreach maybe at places like Home Depot, where people are hopefully buying building materials, and work from there. And then I am so dangerously close to being done, I'm done. Okay.